and let's talk about Codat. My name is Polina Zaichkina. I am Codat Senior Technical Writer, and Codat is used by companies like banks, payment providers, and more to connect to the software that small businesses use. Products that you build with Codat can help small businesses with everything from accessing loans to keeping their vital systems in sync, or actually just removing boring bits of day-to-day business admin. Ultimately, the products that we offer are consumed via an API. So everything that we build for our developer customers. And to support them, we have a dedicated technical content team, myself included. We maintain Codat's documentation portal, produce public-facing content for it, create our open API spec, generate client libraries, and steward documentation and open API spec best practices in the company. When developers build with Codat, they split their time across our product portal and our documentation portal. The product portal serves as a user interface to set up and work with Codat's offerings. So you can use it to create core entities that Codat operates with and manage their connections there. We also provide a set of monitoring tools, like you can see the events that triggered webhooks or monitor how your users go through an authorization journey that we provide. And you can also configure various settings here. So anything from your company branding and palette to things like your account password and stuff like that. Because we're a company that focuses on small business data, you can also view the data that's been shared by your customers here. And we provide additional tools for developers, like, for example, you can create and manage APIs here. And every page of our product portal links to the relevant pages of our documentation portal as well, which is the star of today's show. So we can move on to our docs. We have recently repackaged our Codat's entire functionality into a new set of products. We used to have one monolithic API that could do everything, but it was really quite difficult to understand its real life uses and then wade through the implementation. Now, instead, we have a set of very specific products that are broken down by use case that make it very easy to understand how Codat solves your problems and also how to implement it. It's been a huge improvement to our developer experience. And of course, we had to reflect that change in our documentation and in our OAS. And so a developer's journey through our docs portal now looks a bit different than before. Our new navigation structure gives developers a clear path from understanding Codat's core concepts to learning how to configure their solution and then graduating to a more complex use of our API. Or you can pretty quickly dive into straight specific products, and then you can see how exactly they can help you solve a problem that you have or get your job done and implement those specifically. We also clearly signpost support options that are available to our users, provide them with additional opportunities to get in touch with us where needed. We also have a blog where we post about everything from deprecations to release notes, and then our beautiful, robust API reference, which we will talk about in more detail a little later. We now essentially have 6 documentation websites in one for each one of the products that we offer, and maintaining that is a challenge architecturally, but then also we have more pages than we've ever had before and fewer people working on them full time. And despite all of that, our throughput is higher, we receive better feedback than we ever did, and we're able to provide more detail and accuracy than before. How we did that, I hear you ask? 2 things. We've invested in our tooling and we've enabled other contributors. This time last year, things looked very different in the world of Codat's documentation. We had a team of 4 technical writers. We were all dedicated to very specific functionalities of our API, and we worked full time on creating content just to manage the volume of the requests that we had. We used README as our documentation tool, but as the company and its needs grew and our strategy changed, it no longer suited our needs. So, for example, we wanted more flexibility and control over our docs. So anything from its styling to the functionalities that we're able to use and embed. We also had lots of information that we wanted to capture, and we had a specific view in mind of how we wanted to organize it. And that was not possible without significantly increasing our spend on README. And most importantly, we wanted a straightforward, repeatable process for creating drafts and then reviewing and approving them. And we just couldn't do that with README's out of the box options. Luckily, our team had some engineering background, so we took the plunge and we decided to build our own custom doc site. We store raw content on GitHub. We use Docusource to build our static site and then use Vercel to deploy it. The site uses React and it's open source, so you can find all the source raw content on GitHub at Codat-docs. We spent a couple of weeks migrating the content and then upskilling ourselves with these new tools that we're using. And after that, started to enjoy the benefits of the move that we've made. We now have a lot more flexibility in what we can build in style. And so that means anything from visually aligning our docs to our product and marketing portals. And that gives an experience of a single landscape to someone who's using Codat across all three. Then we can also embed a lot more than we used to be able to. So for example, now we even include interactive examples of suggested user interfaces in our tutorials. And then things like we can embed diagrams into raw text, and our tool of choice here is Mermaid for that. We also appreciate all the key things that the Docs as Code approach entails, like being able to roll back changes, attribute them to specific users, timelines, and commits, or retaining the full history of our knowledge base. We also really embraced the pull request workflow that's supported by GitHub, because that allowed us to expand our pool of contributors significantly, and it lets us collaborate in ways that we could never before. I ran a few enablement sessions to explain the new tools, and then I wrote a set of internal contribution guides. And fortunately, Markdown is quite easy to get to grips with. And since all the changes follow the workflow, our contributors are extra confident because they know that their changes are always going to be reviewed by a technical writer first. So they're quite confident that they're not going to mess anything up. This means that the task of producing content is now not exclusive to technical writers, and we have moved to a culture of stewardship as far as the docs are concerned. As Codat's technical writer, I do still produce a lot of content myself, but a key part of my role is enabling other people to contribute. This means that we're tapping into granular knowledge across the organization in real time. We now have around 30 people who regularly submit content. So we get like niche insights directly from our developers who implemented specific features, or we get details as seen through the lens of product managers. And we can really say that the entirety of Codat is behind our documentation and API reference. And we also appreciate build previews that we get via Vercel, where we can see exactly what we will get as a result of our change. This generally has led to better quality of the updates and better understanding of how our docs architecture is organized. And it also generally increased confidence as far as contributions go, because the contributors can now see how what they're changing is going to affect the result. And as a result, we're now a much smaller team, a more responsive team with a faster turnaround and a wider range of skills. Oh, sorry. The responsibilities of a technical content team are actually wider than it might seem at first. So we found that having a combination of really different skills in our team is hugely enabling. I guess you could say that the skills we now have within the team align with the idea of a DevX engineer, just spread across 4 people. The team now consists of a technical writer, me, a product manager for developer experience, a product director for client experience, and a product designer. Our PMs both have an engineering background, so they're able to include a lot more code samples in our docs and even build demo apps, which is not something we were able to do before. I personally went from spending about 2 weeks on larger pieces of documentation to about 3 to 5 days instead, and smaller changes now take minutes. We can also make large-scale changes without interrupting the existing user experience. So with the product overhaul that I've mentioned, we had to update and reorganize over 300 pages of pages of content, also in parallel with having to keep the existing version of our docs as is, and that would not have been possible in our previous landscape. And as a technical writer, I also quite enjoy working in code. There are, of course, some intangible benefits to this, like getting to be more compassionate and understanding with the way our developer customers work with our content. But then I also get quite big quality of life improvements. Like instead of correcting hundreds of links manually when they need changing, I can now just do a find and replace in a repository. And that means I get to spend much less time on those mundane tasks and get back to value at work instead. With all the changes that we've made this year, we of course want to know if they're landing well with our audience. So to do that, we collect stats and feedback from different sources. We do have Google Analytics enabled for our docs, and we use it for basic visitor analysis. We know that there's a lot of debate in the community on the usefulness of Google Analytics for a developer portal. But to a degree, a docs portal almost serves as a marketing portal for developers, and that's especially true for content like overview pages and introductions and so on. And so it could be especially useful there to use Google Analytics in the same way a marketing does. We usually look at overall user count and site views and page views. For example, since we launched our new product suite, we wanted to see how that resonates with our developer community. And we saw that our user count went up by 55%, which together in discussions with our marketing and product teams can help evaluate the success of that launch and also of each individual product. And page views also help me identify where to focus or potentially not to focus my efforts. Like, for example, for products that are more popular, I might choose to produce additional content for that first. And all of that, of course, leads to changes in our backlog and our priorities. Then we also built a custom widget in our docs to collect user feedback, so our readers can rate every single page in our docs with one click. We then tally up average sentiment for each page, or we can also check each page individually. There is lots of interesting insight you can gain from that. Like, for example, a page with 5 positive and 5 negative views will end up with a neutral rating of 0, but it might actually be very interesting to try and figure out what exactly has led to such drastic differences of opinion. Plus, that also shows you that that page has really high engagement, so that means it's very important for our readers. We also have quite an active GitHub community where people can start discussions on any Codat related topic. Through that, we can potentially identify where our docs are missing required context or examples. And then the questions people ask also help us form our troubleshooting and FAQ pages. And last but not the least in any way, our support team is a super important collaborator for me and my team, and we get lots of useful insights from them. We also have a support widget in our documentation pages, which, if you use it, creates a ticket in Zendesk. And then Zendesk in turn also captures which page the ticket came from. So together with the content of the ticket, you can identify problematic pages as well. The biggest change that we've made this year to our developer experience is our decision to create our API reference manually. And we know that code-generated API references are perceived as very accurate, but we have been code-generating our API reference for many years, and we have found for it to just not be the case. Like, we used many separate repositories for the OAS internally, so it was really difficult to make consistent and reliable changes to it. Like, you really needed to know exactly where everything was to be able to make those changes. And it was also quite difficult to ensure standardized practices this way. We also wanted our OAS to be rich and detailed and accessible to technical writers and other people to contribute. So we chose to craft our open API specification manually to deliver an improved developer experience. We now have more control over the OAS. Like, for example, we can wrap and group endpoints together, which allows us to build new solutions quicker. We can hide endpoints that we don't want our clients to see. We have robust, very detailed copy for everything from endpoints down to field level, parameter level. That is also very easy to contribute to without having to be familiar with the code repository. And the OAS also now includes lots of realistic examples of requests and responses. It's critical for Codat because many of our endpoints are conditional, so the response really depends on which integration you use the endpoint with. So having real life examples of that has been super useful. And of course, you can execute every endpoint within the API reference itself. We also use this detailed OAS to create client libraries in a variety of languages that we constantly add to. We believe that they're critical for a great developer experience because they provide rich context about our API, but directly in the developer's development environment of choice and their language of choice. And they also give the developer extra support to start building with us. We also no longer document everything in our docs in hypothetical HTTP requests. Instead, we include SDK-based code snippets for all the functionalities that we use in our tutorials and guides. And as part of moving to the manual OAS generation, we also implemented document-driven development practices within our product and engineering teams. This basically means that the features are designed and documented before they're ever built. That also helps us make sure that we capture a level of detail that we want in a single source that then can be referred to by the teams working on that feature. It helps us make sure that different Codat functions speak the same language. And in a way, with that approach, we also ended up with a model of stewardship for our OS, as well as we did with our docs. So the technical content team guides on the API design, it oversees the proposed changes to the OS, and makes sure that our endpoints and schemas are consistent with everything else that exists in the landscape. And to help with that, we've put in some linting rules and validation checks as well. And finally, creating the spec manually makes us dog food our own API, because when you code-gen your specification, you don't actually need to use your own product. But as soon as you add a single point of manual intervention, that gives you an opportunity to check that what you have built is actually good for your customer. And so that made us more aware than ever of our customers' developer experience. A challenge that we sometimes face with information is how best to bring separate pages together. They could be perfectly useful on their own, but maybe you want to use them to solve a more complex problem. And sometimes it's as easy as just combining them into a guide, but other times you can't foresee a problem that a user might come up with. So to help our users with that, we created Codat. It's a conversational tool powered by GPT-4. We've built that in-house and traded on our own content. For a quick demo, I will ask it if I should, which one of the two options, or in which cases, should I use an authorization flow product that we offer. Generally, we think that large language models are a great fit and quite a natural fit for documentation, because they have the ability to pull together disparate content and then also summarize it after that, and then work great to highlight the most important points, which is obviously incredibly helpful to our readers. And then it also combines our own knowledge with general development best practices, which is very helpful for context. As you can see, we already got the answer here. And it has summarized and has given two paragraphs, each one describing which scenario or which use case is best suited for which one of our authorization flow options. And the third thing to mention here is that Codat can also do this in any language that you want, which makes our documents immediately accessible to a wider audience, because we don't localize our docs. But with Codat, we basically can. You're going to have to take my word for it. Oh, I see it refreshed. Then you won't have to take my word for it. We're just going to have to give it a minute. Again, I'm asking it a question in Russian. Our documentation is not maintained in Russian. It's maintained purely in English. And I have asked it what exactly I need to do to authorize to be able to use Codat's API. And again, you're going to have to take my word for it, or for those of you who do speak Russian, you will be able to see this or understand this. It's provided me the information from our docs that explains what you need to do and how you need to authorize your API calls to be able to use Codat, and the content is correct. So without having our content in a different language, we are still able to provide this support to our customers, our readers. For brevity's sake and the time's sake, I won't go into the details of how exactly we built Codat. There is a brief summary for this on the slide. One thing I do want to say is that it's currently a standalone page, and our next step is to embed that into our developer portal instead of having it in a separate UI. And so apart from external benefits that I have previously mentioned, we also ended up reaping some internal benefits from Codat. So in DevX, testing to make sure that a user experiences our product in the way that we want them to experience it is very critical, but it's also not always easy. And so Codat can serve as sort of an equivalent of our reader or our user. We can ask it key questions, and then it will either succeed or fail in getting an answer. And so if Codat can't do it, then maybe our content is not exactly right or something's missing, and then a user potentially won't be able to deal with that question either. We also obviously log all of the questions that readers ask and the answer that Codat gives. and that drives documentation improvements and also, again, prioritization of our work potentially. And Codat also ended up supporting collaboration within Codat. Because the tool is trained on our docs, it can follow our tone of voice and chosen style pretty well. So you can put technically accurate content into it, and Codat can structure and word it almost as if I wrote it. And so our contributors, if our contributors run their text through Codat, it aligns it with our style guide better, and then that reduces the amount of editing that I need to do on those changes later. It's been a very challenging year for us so far. We've operated as a reduced team with a shifting skill set and worked not just on overhauling the content itself, we also had to change the patterns and processes in which we produce that content. And so sometimes you really just want to ask yourself why we want to document the things the way we want to do that, and what is the payoff of good developer experience. Ultimately, if you get developer experience right, it means our customers get to go live quicker with more robust solutions. And it's also a factor in why they chose us in the first place. We're now winning clients based on the developer experience that we provide in a way that we never used to be able to before, as evidenced by some of the feedback capture here in the slide. And that's it. I've taken you through Codat's developer portal, and I told you what we do to constantly improve the developer experience that we provide. Thank you for your attention.
And I thank you very much in the name of, I think, everyone in the audience. This is a cliche, but I'm a bit speechless right now. Um, so I don't know how you did this in 1 year, but Max joined us on the stage. As I know from LinkedIn, because we haven't met before, Max, you're a product director and you're also driving client experience.
Yeah. So I joined Codat as a normal product manager, I guess. But then about a year ago, I kind of took over stewarding our docs and developer experience as a whole. And I think having a full-time product manager caring about docs is a really good way of getting organizational buy-in that documentation matters. I noticed that the kind of top question there is about how to get developers to actually contribute to your docs. It's not easy. I would say that's ramped up, particularly in the last 3 months. The first half of the year was a bit quiet on the old pull requests. But it's about, I guess, product managers can have a disproportionate weight in organizations. And so you can get leadership on board with the fact that documentation matters and lead the charge yourself, I guess. We had to do a lot of the upfront grunt work to sort of show where we were heading with the docs. And after that kind of began to come back to leaders that our customers cared about that they were seeing improvements, and that they started singing the praises of us and telling people this is why documentation matters and sort of doing our job for us on that kind of evangelism point. So yeah, I definitely recommend, if you don't have a product manager involved in the creation of your documentation, pin someone down who does care about it and get them to be more involved.
Do you want to add to that, Paulina?
No, I don't think so. Not to this one.
So that was about how you managed to get the developers to write and contribute, because everyone knows how much developers are famed to be not wanting to give fully fledged documentation. Now, the second most voted question, but I thought that was problematic still. I looked through the portal and found various resources, such as API documentation, code example, integration tips. How do you coordinate and structure this information to make it as easy as possible? So the coordination.
We've done a lot of different ways over the past 10 months. The answer is just keep iterating, really. Not being boxed in by a CMS is really helpful. To be able to, and if you are also comfortable writing the code yourself and being able to play about with your, like, re-architecting the site from the ground up to suit and improve on the developer experience, that's really useful. But I just had to play about with it and keep trying new things. And like we launched basically this new custom built site in January, and it has taken many iterations since then, and it hasn't stopped changing. I think having the empathy in your team as well to sort of go through it in a way closer to how your customers would, that empathy is super useful. Otherwise, you're just kind of playing guesswork.
It does sound super scary, though.
It's a lot of work. Like, there is no denying that it's a lot of work, but we're also lucky that we're quite we're a small team that also talks to each other a lot, so that's helpful as far as coordinating things go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of feedback to each other. We're very collaborative, and that's something that working like developers do with pull requests in GitHub can be really helpful for. I think when we've used other tools before, it was quite difficult to find a place to have that conversation, give feedback, and incorporate that feedback. But GitHub is built to do that, right? So using a tool that's built with collaboration first means it's almost impossible not to collaborate.
Going a bit beyond the line, but to me, this sounds a little bit like never waste a good chaos. Anyway, I mean, the way you say that the team really pulled together, even if you were reduced in numbers, I think it's quite exemplary, what you pulled off. How much editing is still needed for docs, and how much of that editing is done with the LLM, and how much of that is done manually?
So I think the point to mention there is when I say that Codat helps align with the style and tone of voice, I don't mean I use it in my day-to-day work. I mean our collaborators, other people who contribute to our docs, they have that as one of their options of choice if they want to. I mean, it's a very hard thing to estimate. Obviously, it really depends on who exactly is writing and how much they want to write, because obviously small changes versus brand new pages of content require very different effort. But having Codat didn't eliminate the need for editing, and there is still quite a bit of it that I need to do when the requests for changes come through. What I've noticed is that people tend to write a lot more and in a lot more elaborate ways than necessary. You could always shorten and simplify that, which is a big part of what I need to do. Also, like structuring content in a way that's a lot easier to read and understand. That's a big thing that also needs to be done with the contributions proposed by others. And actually, following up on the previous question on how you get developers to contribute, I think they also really care about what they built being correct and like publicly correct and described correctly. So for them, it's like this extra element of pride, I guess, involved, and that helps also kind of get them on board with the process.
There's going to be more questions about Codat. I think it's endless. Like, it was super impressive what you've just shown. So I will ask that to go into the deep end afterwards. But I do want to ask one thing, since we also have Max here. You mentioned that you work together with support, so there's a lot of data there. But what is the KPIs that the portal is answering for?
It's it's an interesting one. We had at the beginning of the year, we were very focused on a growth go-to-market motion where it was much more about self-service. And actually, over the past kind of the latter quarter, we've doubled down much more on our enterprise offering. So a lot of the metrics we kind of previously been heading towards, which were actually tracking user journeys from marketing site to docs to sign up to activation of some kind, they kind of all kind of went out the window. And actually, we're going through a process at the moment of completely reimagining how to track engagement, how to correlate engagement with client go live, things like that. It's much easier to do that with our SDKs and that supportive technical content outside of the docs, like the other supportive stuff. At the moment, we are definitely relying on kind of anecdotal evidence that it has been a constructive part of a go live for a key client. So if anyone else on the call has good answers and good metrics, would love to hear them as well. But yeah, this is definitely a kind of point of discovery. It was a lot easier when it was kind of more users and growth, self-serve kind of focused.
Mhm. Are you looking at other fields or completely different ecosystems for inspiration on what is it that you really want to call your metrics?
Polina, you've been thinking about this quite a lot recently?
I have been thinking about this quite a lot. Yeah, absolutely. Especially as I've mentioned in my presentation, with how much debate there is in the documentation community about metrics, especially quantitative ones. Yeah, I do look a lot towards the experience of other technical writers. You know, I've been to multiple conferences when people talk about that a lot. So I kind of try and get all of that together and summarize what of that is meaningful for us. I think just kind of taking somebody else's experience and then applying it to your own docs doesn't necessarily work that way, because like I said, some of the stuff might just not be relevant to you. So I'm currently in the process of kind of like sifting through that and figuring out what of this we want to actually take on board and track for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. But only docs, like so marketing, e-commerce, these kind of things are not yet relevant enough?
They are being tracked, but they wouldn't be tracked by the technical content team. That would be something that our marketing team and our product team look into.
So it's still a completely different dynamics. That's what I was fishing for. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I was just going to add, I guess, that like often in the world of marketing, you're really looking at high volume and statistical significance, whereas in documentation, we tend to be looking at lower volumes and really looking for that more qualitative feedback or digging into individual users' experiences. So it's quite different.
Mm-hmm. Very interested where you're going to be shifting. I hope that next year we're going to hear where you got with your change of mindset and how you're looking at it. I found that riveting, but maybe it's just me. Thank you very, very much for the presentation. Paulina, if you ever decide to write a whodunit book, I'd like to read that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.